I have learned that the desert never keeps secrets forever. It simply waits for the right heart to notice where everyone else keeps looking away. Every morning at exactly 6:15, before the Arizona sun had climbed high enough to turn the endless sand into a sea of shimmering heat, a lone German shepherd appeared on an abandoned stretch of highway that no longer existed on most modern maps. Truck drivers occasionally caught a glimpse of him through dusty windshields. Ranchers mentioned him during early breakfasts at the small diner outside the town of Red Mesa. Tourists assumed he belonged to someone living nearby, although there were no houses for nearly 20 miles in any direction. The dog would quietly step onto the cracked pavement, walk to the same faded mile marker leaning slightly toward the desert wind, sit facing the open horizon for several silent minutes, then disappear beyond a line of weathered rock formations before anyone managed to follow him. After nearly 3 weeks of hearing the same strange stories, Jack Carter stopped dismissing them as coincidence. The retired United States Marine had spent 24 years learning that trained dogs rarely repeated the same behavior without purpose. Living alone in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Red Mesa, Jack had grown accustomed to peaceful mornings filled with fresh coffee, desert silence, and the distant calls of hawks gliding above the red sandstone cliffs. His military service had ended years ago, yet certain instincts never faded. He still noticed details others ignored. Fresh tire tracks where no vehicles should have traveled. A broken fence repaired by unfamiliar hands. A pattern repeated often enough to become impossible to overlook. On the 4th morning after hearing another local describe the mysterious German shepherd, Jack decided to see the road for himself. He left home before sunrise in his aging pickup truck, driving west along a forgotten county route where telephone poles stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. The desert carried its own quiet language. Cool morning air smelled of dry sagebrush, sun-baked stone, and creosote left behind by a brief rain several nights earlier. Long shadows rested across the sand, while golden light slowly painted the rugged landscape with warm colors that lasted only a few precious minutes before daylight grew harsh. Jack parked nearly 200 yards from the abandoned highway and stepped outside, without closing the truck door too loudly. Silence settled around him so completely that he could hear tiny grains of sand moving across the pavement whenever the breeze shifted direction. He waited patiently beside an old fence post, checking his watch only once. At exactly 6:15, movement appeared beyond the distant ridge. A large black and tan German shepherd emerged with calm confidence, neither frightened nor searching for food. The dog walked directly toward the faded mile marker, as though following invisible instructions remembered perfectly. Every step appeared deliberate. Every pause carried quiet certainty. Jack remained completely still. The German shepherd stopped beside the leaning marker, lifted his head toward the empty desert beyond the highway, and remained there without making a sound. There was no owner calling his name, no vehicle approaching, no visible destination waiting beyond the endless sea of sand. 5 silent minutes passed before the dog calmly turned away and disappeared between towering red rock formations, exactly as every witness had described. Jack looked down at the untouched stretch of broken asphalt, then back toward the place where the German shepherd had vanished. Years of military experience whispered the same thought deep inside his mind. This was not the routine of a lost dog. It looked remarkably like the final movement of a mission that had never truly ended. Jack returned before sunrise the following morning, parking his weathered pickup in exactly the same place without expecting anyone else to be there. The desert greeted him with the same quiet dignity it had carried the day before. A cool breeze drifted across the open valley, carrying the dry scent of creosote, sagebrush, and distant mesquite, while the first ribbon of orange light slowly appeared beyond the rugged mountains. He poured fresh coffee into a metal cup and leaned against the truck, watching the abandoned highway disappear into endless silence. Years earlier, he had learned that patience often revealed more than questions ever could. At exactly 6:15, the German shepherd appeared again. The dog emerged from behind the same sandstone ridge with steady, unhurried steps, his thick black and tan coat glowing softly beneath the rising sun. He never glanced toward Jack, yet he never appeared nervous either. His attention remained fixed on the cracked stretch of asphalt ahead. Jack quietly lowered the coffee cup and observed every movement with the calm discipline that had once guided reconnaissance patrols through unfamiliar terrain. The German Shepherd reached the fated mile marker, stopped in precisely the same position as the previous morning, and faced the empty desert beyond the road. 5 silent minutes passed. The wind gently pushed loose sand across broken pavement, producing a soft whisper that seemed almost like distant voices carried through time. The dog remained perfectly still. His ears occasionally shifted toward sounds too faint for human hearing, yet his posture never changed. Jack slowly removed a small notebook from his jacket pocket and recorded the exact time, the direction of the morning breeze, the position of the sun, and the dog's unwavering behavior. Nothing suggested confusion. Nothing resembled random wandering. Everything reflected routine built through repetition over countless mornings. When the 5 minutes ended, the German Shepherd calmly turned away once more and followed the same narrow path between scattered desert rocks. This time Jack waited several additional seconds before moving. He knew experienced working dogs often noticed pursuit long before anyone realized it. Maintaining a respectful distance, he followed the faint trail through loose sand scattered with small cactus, weathered stones, and patches of brittle desert grass. The morning remained cool, making each footprint remarkably clear against the pale earth. After nearly a quarter mile, the trail curved around towering red boulders polished smooth by decades of wind. Jack expected the dog to disappear over the next ridge, yet instead he found fresh paw prints stopping beside a flat sandstone outcrop overlooking a broad stretch of untouched desert. There the tracks simply ended. Jack slowly searched the surrounding ground, studying every inch with careful attention. No return tracks appeared. No fresh human footprints crossed the area. Only wind-shaped delicate ripples across the sand, as though nature itself had quietly erased whatever came next. He stood in thoughtful silence before noticing something unusual. Unlike every other patch of open desert nearby, one narrow strip of ground extending toward the abandoned highway contained almost no cactus, no brush, and almost no scattered stones. It formed a subtle line running straight across the landscape before disappearing beneath drifting sand. Jack knelt and brushed loose grains aside with one hand. Beneath the surface, he uncovered compacted gravel arranged far too evenly to be natural. He looked toward the distant mile marker where the German Shepherd had once again begun his mysterious morning ritual. A quiet realization settled over him with unmistakable certainty. The dog had never been waiting beside the road. Every morning, he had been marking the beginning of another path that the desert had almost completely hidden from the world. Jack returned to the hidden strip of compacted gravel before dawn on the third morning, carrying only a small backpack, a folding brush, a notebook, 2 bottles of water, and the quiet determination that had carried him through countless difficult assignments years before. The desert greeted him with a peaceful stillness broken only by the distant cry of a raven circling above the sandstone cliffs. Cool air drifted across the valley, carrying the familiar scent of dry sage, creosote, and sun-warmed earth waiting for another day beneath the Arizona sky. He parked his truck farther away than before, unwilling to disturb whatever quiet routine the German Shepherd had faithfully repeated for so long. At exactly 6:15, the dog appeared once again from behind the weathered ridge. His calm amber eyes remained fixed on the abandoned highway while his steady pace never varied by even a single step. Jack watched from a respectful distance as the German Shepherd reached the leaning mile marker, sat facing the open desert for 5 silent minutes, then slowly stood and continued toward the hidden path beneath the sand. This time Jack did not immediately follow. Instead, he waited until the dog disappeared completely beyond the sandstone formations before walking directly toward the narrow strip of gravel he had uncovered the previous morning. Kneeling carefully, he used the soft brush to remove another thin layer of drifting sand. The compacted surface continued in a nearly perfect straight line, far too precise to have formed naturally. Every few feet, he uncovered additional gravel arranged in the same deliberate pattern. Someone had once built this route with purpose. After nearly 40 minutes of patient work beneath the steadily brightening sky, the gravel path curved gently toward a cluster of large desert boulders rising above the surrounding landscape. Jack paused, studying the rocks from several angles before noticing something almost invisible beneath years of wind-blown dust. One flat sandstone slab bore the faint outline of an old wooden survey stake almost completely buried beside it. He carefully cleared away more sand until weathered wood finally emerged. The top had long ago broken away, yet the remaining section still stood firmly anchored beneath the desert floor. Wrapped around the base rested a rusted length of thin metal wire. Jack gently loosened the wire without forcing it. Beneath it lay a small rectangular metal plate covered by decades of dust and oxidation. He poured a few drops of clean water across its surface before carefully wiping it with a soft cloth. Slowly, worn letters began to appear beneath the fading rust. Most had become impossible to read, but one line remained surprisingly clear. Route 7. Temporary humanitarian access. Jack quietly repeated the words to himself. They did not resemble ordinary highway markings. They sounded official, yet strangely forgotten. His attention shifted toward the flat sandstone beside the marker where the German shepherd's paw prints had disappeared the previous morning. Running his fingers gently across the rock, he noticed an unnatural seam hidden beneath wind-blown sand. It looked less like a crack formed by nature and more like the carefully fitted edge of something intentionally concealed. Just then, soft footsteps approached behind him. Jack slowly turned without alarm. The German shepherd had silently returned and now stood only a few feet away. The dog did not bark or move closer. Instead, he quietly looked from Jack to the hidden seam beneath the sandstone, then back into Jack's eyes with calm, unwavering patience. It was not the expression of an animal asking for help. It was the quiet confidence of a faithful guide waiting for someone else to finally notice the place he had never stopped protecting. The German shepherd remained motionless beside the sandstone slab, his calm amber eyes never leaving Jack as the morning sun slowly climbed above the distant mesas. A gentle breeze carried grains of fine desert sand across the hidden seam, almost as if the landscape itself had spent decades protecting whatever rested beneath it. Jack slowly removed a compact folding shovel from his backpack, then hesitated. Years in the Marine Corps had taught him that some discoveries deserve patience more than force. He knelt beside the stone and carefully brushed away the remaining sand with steady hands instead of digging aggressively. The German shepherd quietly lay down nearby, resting his head between his front paws while continuing to watch every movement without the slightest sign of anxiety. As more of the sandstone edge became visible, Jack noticed a narrow iron ring nearly concealed beneath the weathered rock. It had been forged by hand long ago, now darkened by rust, but still remarkably solid. Taking a slow breath, he wrapped both hands around the ring and gently lifted. At first nothing happened. Then the sandstone shifted only a few inches with a deep scraping sound that echoed softly across the empty desert. Beneath it appeared a shallow stone compartment carefully lined with smooth rock. Inside rested a weatherproof military storage box coated in faded olive paint, its metal corners worn by time, but otherwise untouched. Jack carefully lifted the container into the morning light. Dust covered every surface, yet the old waterproof seals remained intact. A faded government inventory label could barely be read beneath layers of sand. The printed letters had almost disappeared, but one line remained surprisingly clear. Emergency humanitarian supply cache. Jack quietly stared at the words. This had never been an ordinary desert road. He carefully released the weathered metal clasps. The lid opened with gentle resistance, revealing a neatly organized collection preserved far better than anyone could have imagined. Resting on top lay a folded American flag sealed inside a protective plastic sleeve. Beneath it rested an old military dog tag attached to a worn leather cord, a polished silver compass, several waterproof document envelopes, and a carefully wrapped bundle tied with faded blue ribbon. The German shepherd slowly stood and stepped closer, lowering his nose toward the open container before stopping respectfully, without touching anything. His expression reflected quiet recognition rather than curiosity. Jack picked up the dog tag first. Most of the engraving remained clear despite the passing years. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, United States Marine Corps. The name meant nothing to Jack, yet something about it felt strangely familiar. Next, he unfolded the blue ribbon surrounding the preserved bundle. Inside rested a handwritten letter protected within multiple waterproof sleeves. The paper had yellowed with age, but every word remained perfectly readable. The first sentence immediately caught his attention. "If someone is reading this, then our road has finally been found again." Jack felt a chill despite the warming desert air. He carefully placed the letter back into its protective cover, unwilling to expose it to the growing wind before reading every page safely. As he reached for the remaining document envelope, another object quietly slipped onto the sandstone beside the box. It was a black and white photograph showing a young Marine standing proudly beside a black and tan German Shepherd whose intelligent eyes looked almost identical to the faithful dog now standing beside Jack. On the back of the photograph, written in careful blue ink, appeared a single sentence that seemed to bridge generations with quiet certainty. "Some promises survive because faithful hearts refuse to forget where they began." Jack carried the weatherproof box back to his pickup with the same care he once reserved for irreplaceable field equipment, making certain every document remained protected from the strengthening desert wind. The German Shepherd walked quietly beside him without pulling ahead, his steady pace suggesting that the most important part of the journey had never been the discovery itself, but making certain the right person finally found it. By the time they reached the truck, the morning sun had transformed the Arizona landscape into endless waves of golden light stretching across red mesas and distant mountain ridges. Jack spread a clean canvas cloth across the tailgate before placing every item from the cache in careful order. The folded American flag remained untouched out of respect while he opened the first waterproof document envelope. Inside rested several handwritten pages, each preserved with remarkable clarity despite decades beneath the desert sand. He slowly began reading. The letter had been written by Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer during the final days of an operation never mentioned in any history Jack remembered. Daniel described a forgotten humanitarian route crossing the desert where Marines quietly escorted families, medical volunteers, and relief supplies through dangerous terrain after severe flooding had destroyed nearby communities. The road had never appeared on public maps because protecting innocent civilians depended upon keeping the route hidden. Every sentence reflected calm professionalism rather than heroics. Daniel never described himself as extraordinary. Instead, he wrote about the courage of exhausted parents carrying children, volunteer nurses refusing to abandon patients, and local ranchers sharing water with complete strangers despite having little themselves. Halfway through the letter, Jack paused as another paragraph caught his attention. Daniel wrote that his German Shepherd partner, Valor, always sensed approaching travelers long before anyone else could hear engines or footsteps. According to the letter, countless frightened families reached safety because Valor quietly alerted the team without panic or confusion. Jack slowly looked toward the faithful German Shepherd resting peacefully beneath the shade of the truck. The resemblance between the dog in the old photograph and the one now lying before him felt almost impossible to ignore. They shared the same intelligent amber eyes, the same calm posture, even the same small patch of lighter fur across the chest. Jack gently unfolded another sheet tucked inside the envelope. This one contained a carefully hand-drawn map showing the abandoned highway, the hidden gravel route beneath the sand, and several marked supply locations extending farther into the desert than modern satellite maps currently displayed. In one corner, Daniel had written a final instruction. "If this road is ever forgotten, let whoever finds these pages remember that kindness should never disappear simply because history becomes quiet." Beneath the map rested a sealed envelope labeled only with two handwritten words: Family Records. Jack carefully opened it and discovered a faded birth certificate, several personal photographs, and a letter addressed to Daniel's younger sister, never mailed, never delivered. Before reading another word, he quietly closed the envelope again. Some memories deserved privacy until the proper family could receive them. As he organized the documents once more, the polished silver compass suddenly reflected a bright beam of morning sunlight across the inside of the truck bed. Jack instinctively followed the narrow line of reflected light toward the western horizon. The compass needle had settled perfectly steady, pointing not toward the hidden cache they had uncovered, but farther into the open desert where another distant line of weathered sandstone cliffs rose against the brilliant blue sky. The German Shepherd slowly stood, lifted his head in exactly the same direction, and waited with calm certainty, as though the first discovery had never been the destination at all, but only the beginning of a promise still waiting to be completed. Jack spent the remainder of the afternoon studying every page inside the weatherproof box before making a single decision. Years of military experience had taught him that remarkable discoveries deserved careful verification rather than hurried conclusions. As evening settled across the Arizona desert, he secured the American flag, the handwritten letters, the map, the compass, and the family envelope inside a locked cabinet at his ranch house. The German shepherd rested quietly near the front porch, watching the western horizon as warm shades of orange and crimson slowly faded into a sky filled with countless stars. Neither of them seemed eager to rush forward. It felt as though the desert itself expected patience. Before sunrise the following morning, Jack contacted an old friend named Emily Brooks, a military archivist who had spent more than 20 years preserving humanitarian mission records for veterans and their families. Emily respected Jack enough to recognize the seriousness in his voice long before he finished explaining what he had found. She agreed to drive from Phoenix that very morning, bringing access to historical databases and archival reference materials that ordinary researchers rarely used. Shortly after 10 o'clock, her government vehicle rolled into the ranch driveway. Emily stepped out carrying 2 weatherproof document cases, a portable scanner, and several archival notebooks. After greeting Jack warmly, she immediately knelt beside the German shepherd, smiling as the calm dog accepted a gentle scratch behind one ear before quietly returning to his place beneath the porch shade. "He carries himself like a trained service dog," Emily observed softly. Jack nodded. "That is exactly what first caught my attention." Inside the farmhouse, Emily carefully examined every item one at a time while wearing protective cotton gloves. The folded American flag remained sealed. The letters were scanned without unnecessary handling. The dog tag, silver compass, and handwritten map were photographed under controlled lighting before she compared every visible serial number with archived military references stored on her encrypted laptop. Nearly 2 hours passed in complete silence except for the occasional turning of paper and the gentle tapping of computer keys. Finally, Emily looked up, her expression thoughtful rather than surprised. "Daniel Mercer served exactly where these documents suggest," she said quietly. "Most of this operation remains absent from publicly available military histories because it was classified as a humanitarian emergency support corridor. Portions were later declassified, but many individual records were never connected." Jack leaned forward. "Does the route still exist?" Emily slowly unfolded the hand-drawn map beside several modern satellite images. "The paved highway remains, but the humanitarian corridor itself disappeared beneath decades of shifting sand after maintenance stopped. That explains why modern maps no longer recognize it." She traced one finger across the faded pencil markings until reaching the final coordinate written in Daniel's careful handwriting. The location rested far beyond the hidden supply cache, deep within a section of protected desert where towering sandstone cliffs surrounded a narrow valley almost invisible from above. Emily paused for a long moment before opening another archived reference file. A faded aerial photograph, taken more than 30 years earlier, appeared on her screen. Running almost perfectly through the valley was the same gravel route Jack had uncovered beneath the sand. At its far western end stood a small desert relief station marked with a simple cross. Modern satellite photographs showed nothing but empty landscape. Jack quietly stared at the 2 images lying side by side. Time had erased the buildings completely, yet the old map and the hidden road matched each other with remarkable precision. Outside the farmhouse, the German shepherd slowly stood and walked toward the western fence line overlooking the distant mesas. He stopped there without making a sound, his calm amber eyes fixed upon the same forgotten horizon shown on Daniel Mercer's final map, patiently waiting as though he already knew that one more chapter of the journey still remained buried beyond the edge of the desert. The following morning began beneath a sky so clear that every distant mesa seemed close enough to touch. Cool desert air carried the gentle fragrance of sagebrush and creosote, while the first rays of sunlight painted the sandstone cliffs with soft shades of amber and gold. Jack Carter, Emily Brooks, and the faithful German shepherd departed the ranch shortly after dawn, following the faded hand-drawn map with careful precision. Emily drove the government utility vehicle equipped with satellite positioning equipment, while Jack followed behind in his pickup, carrying the weatherproof military box and the original documents. The German shepherd rode quietly beside him, watching the desert through the open window with calm attention. Nearly 40 miles west of Red Mesa, the paved road ended. Beyond it stretched a forgotten landscape untouched by modern development, where ancient rock formations, dry washes, and towering cliffs created a maze that few travelers ever entered. Emily stopped beside a weathered trail marker almost hidden beneath drifting sand. Comparing the faded map with satellite imagery, she slowly smiled. The old humanitarian corridor followed this exact valley, she said quietly. Modern maps erased the road, but the land never forgot where it was. Together, they continued on foot beneath the warming morning sun. The German shepherd naturally walked several yards ahead, never rushing, never looking back with impatience, simply maintaining the same confident pace he had followed every morning beside the abandoned highway. His movements seemed less like searching and more like remembering. The narrow valley gradually opened into a peaceful basin surrounded by tall sandstone walls that shielded the area from harsh desert winds. Although time had erased nearly every visible structure, subtle traces remained for anyone willing to notice them. Jack found evenly spaced foundation stones almost buried beneath sand. Emily uncovered fragments of weathered wooden posts still standing beneath desert grass. Nearby rested the rusted frame of what had once been a hand-operated water pump. Every discovery matched Daniel Mercer's carefully drawn map with remarkable accuracy. Emily quietly photographed each location while recording official coordinates for historical preservation. As they continued exploring the site, the German shepherd approached a broad cottonwood tree growing unexpectedly from the center of the basin. Unlike the surrounding desert vegetation, the old tree remained healthy, its deep roots reaching hidden groundwater beneath the rocky soil. The dog stopped beneath its wide branches and calmly sat facing a flat section of earth covered by fallen leaves carried there over countless seasons. Jack slowly walked forward, immediately noticing that the ground beneath the tree appeared unusually level compared with the surrounding landscape. Kneeling carefully, he brushed aside loose sand and dry leaves until a rectangular stone border gradually emerged beneath the surface. Emily joined him, her expression growing more thoughtful with every passing moment. Together they uncovered a polished granite marker almost completely hidden by decades of drifting earth. The inscription remained protected beneath the sand. Using only soft brushes and clean water, they carefully revealed the carved letters without damaging the weathered surface. As the final layer of dust disappeared, sunlight reached the stone at precisely the right angle. The words became visible one line at a time. Desert Humanitarian Relief Station, dedicated to every volunteer who chose compassion before recognition. Beneath the dedication appeared a long list of names. Jack slowly scanned each carefully carved line until his eyes stopped on one familiar entry. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, United States Marine Corps. The German shepherd quietly lowered his head toward the memorial stone without making a sound. Jack noticed something else only moments later. At the bottom of the monument, nearly hidden beneath years of desert dust, someone had engraved one final sentence in smaller letters. No road truly disappears while one faithful heart still remembers the way. Emily remained kneeling beside the memorial stone for a long time, carefully comparing each engraved name with the historical records stored inside her archival database. The warm desert breeze gently moved the branches of the old cottonwood tree overhead, filling the quiet basin with a soft rustling sound unlike anything else in the surrounding landscape. Jack stood nearby holding the weatherproof military box while the German shepherd rested peacefully beside the monument, his calm amber eyes reflecting the morning light that filtered through the leaves. After several silent minutes, Emily slowly closed her laptop and looked toward Jack with an expression that mixed professional certainty with genuine emotion. "The names are real," she said softly. "Every one of them appears in military and humanitarian archives. Most served only briefly along this corridor before the operation ended. But something is missing. Jack glanced back toward the weathered monument. Daniel's story? Emily nodded. The official records confirm he served here, but they end without explaining why this station disappeared from public history. She reached once more into the weatherproof box and carefully unfolded the final handwritten pages that had remained unread. The paper felt fragile despite its remarkable preservation. Jack stood quietly while Emily began reading aloud. Daniel described the final weeks before the humanitarian route closed. Heavy seasonal flooding had destroyed roads throughout the region, leaving isolated families without food, medicine, or safe transportation. Rather than abandoning the mission, local volunteers, ranchers, military personnel, medical workers, and tribal community members joined together to keep the desert corridor operating long after official schedules suggested ending the assignment. Daniel never wrote about medals or recognition. Instead, every paragraph focused on ordinary people choosing compassion during extraordinary circumstances. One passage made Emily pause. She quietly read the words a second time. Daniel explained that if future generations ever discovered the hidden supply cache, they should remember that the road existed because neighbors trusted one another before strangers became friends. Jack lowered his eyes toward the folded American flag resting safely inside the military box. The silence surrounding them no longer felt empty. It felt filled with countless forgotten acts of kindness that history had simply overlooked. Just then, the sound of an approaching engine echoed softly through the valley. An older pickup truck slowly entered the basin, stopping several yards away. An elderly Native American rancher stepped out, leaning lightly upon a polished walking stick. His weathered face carried the quiet confidence of someone returning to a familiar place after many years. He smiled gently when he noticed the German shepherd sitting beneath the cottonwood tree. "I wondered how long it would take," he said. Jack introduced himself, while Emily respectfully explained their discovery. The elderly man listened without interrupting before looking toward the memorial stone. "I was 12 years old when my mother brought blankets and drinking water here," he said quietly. "The Marines never asked who people were. If someone needed help, they were welcomed." His eyes rested upon Daniel Mercer's engraved name. "I remember him. He always arrived with a German shepherd walking beside him." The elderly rancher slowly knelt despite his age and gently touched the weathered stone. That dog waited beside the road every morning before the supply trucks arrived. After the station closed, people said he continued returning long after everyone else had gone. Jack instinctively looked toward the faithful German shepherd resting peacefully only a few feet away. The resemblance between generations suddenly carried far greater meaning than appearance alone. The elderly rancher smiled warmly at the calm dog before speaking one final sentence, almost as though sharing a memory rather than a mystery. "Some families pass down photographs. Others pass down stories. Perhaps loyal hearts pass down directions that no map can ever fully explain." The German shepherd quietly stood, walked toward the old rancher, accepted one gentle touch upon his neck, then slowly turned his eyes toward the western cliffs once again, patiently waiting as though another forgotten truth still rested beyond the next horizon. The elderly rancher remained beneath the old cottonwood tree long after his story had ended, quietly, watching the desert as though every distant ridge still carried familiar memories. Jack thanked him before carefully packing the historical documents back into the weatherproof military box. Emily secured digital copies of every inscription and photograph, knowing the discoveries would soon require formal verification through military archives and historical preservation offices. Yet before anyone prepared to leave, the German shepherd calmly walked away from the memorial and headed toward the western sandstone cliffs once again. His pace remained steady and confident, never hurried, never uncertain. Jack exchanged a brief glance with Emily, then quietly followed. The elderly rancher smiled without surprise. "He always knows when the story is not finished," he said softly. The narrow trail wound through towering red rock formations where sunlight painted the canyon walls with deep shades of gold and copper. Cool air drifted through the shaded passage, carrying the faint scent of desert wildflowers growing between ancient stones after the recent seasonal rain. The farther they walked, the quieter the world became until only footsteps and the occasional song of a canyon wren echoed through the peaceful landscape. Nearly half a mile beyond the memorial basin, The canyon opened into a small overlook facing an endless stretch of untouched desert. The German shepherd stopped beside a weathered limestone wall where decades of wind had carved gentle curves into the rock. He lowered his head toward the ground and quietly waited. Jack slowly knelt beside him, brushing away loose sand with careful hands. Almost immediately, he uncovered several flat stones arranged too evenly to be natural. Emily joined him, gently clearing the remaining sand until a narrow metal cylinder emerged beneath the carefully stacked rocks. Unlike the military storage box they had already discovered, this container appeared much smaller, sealed with thick brass caps that had resisted decades of desert weather. Jack carefully unscrewed the protective lid. Inside rested several tightly rolled waterproof documents bound together with faded leather cord. A smaller envelope rested on top, bearing a handwritten note. For whoever completes the journey. Jack quietly unfolded the letter. Daniel Mercer's familiar handwriting appeared once again across the page, steady and remarkably clear despite the passing years. Daniel explained that he had prepared 2 separate collections because history often remembered official reports while quietly forgetting the people whose kindness truly carried difficult missions forward. The larger cache preserved military records. This final collection belonged to the volunteers, ranchers, tribal families, nurses, mechanics, pilots, teachers, and ordinary neighbors whose names might never appear in government files. Beneath the letter rested dozens of carefully written pages containing names, personal memories, and brief stories describing small acts of generosity performed during the humanitarian mission. One ranch family had donated nearly every gallon of drinking water they owned. A local mechanic repaired military vehicles without accepting payment. School children gathered blankets for families arriving with nothing except hope. None of the stories described extraordinary heroes. Together, they revealed ordinary people quietly choosing compassion whenever someone else needed it most. Emily carefully turned another page before stopping in thoughtful silence. Tucked inside the final document rested a complete list of every civilian volunteer who had served along the forgotten desert corridor. This, she whispered, fills every missing gap in the official history. Jack slowly looked across the endless desert stretching beyond the overlook. The German shepherd sat peacefully beside him, his calm amber eyes fixed upon the distant abandoned highway where the journey had first begun. For the first time since Jack had followed those mysterious morning footprints, he understood why the faithful dog had returned day after day. The road had never been asking anyone to remember only one Marine. It had patiently waited for someone willing to remember every quiet heart that had transformed an isolated desert trail into a pathway of hope for countless strangers whose lives had forever been changed by simple acts of kindness. Jack and Emily returned to Red Mesa carrying far more than a collection of preserved documents. They carried an entire chapter of American history that had quietly waited beneath the desert sand for decades. The following morning, Emily contacted the Military Humanitarian Archives Division, the Arizona Historical Preservation Office, and the Regional Veterans Affairs historian responsible for reviewing long-forgotten service records. Instead of making extraordinary claims, she simply submitted the evidence exactly as they had found it. Every document was scanned at archival quality. Every handwritten page was matched with verified military records. Every location recorded by satellite coordinates corresponded perfectly with Daniel Mercer's carefully drawn map. Jack remained patient throughout the process. Experience had taught him that truth rarely needed to hurry. It only needed to remain consistent. During the following 2 weeks, specialists examined every artifact recovered from the hidden caches. The dog tag matched official enlistment records. The serial number engraved on the silver compass appeared within military inventory documents from the same humanitarian operation. The folded American flag carried manufacturing markings identical to those issued during that period. Even the waterproof storage containers were confirmed as authentic emergency military equipment once used for remote humanitarian support missions. Most remarkable of all, the names listed inside Daniel's final collection corresponded with county records, church registries, tribal community archives, volunteer organizations, and newspaper articles preserved inside local libraries. Piece by piece, a forgotten story quietly rebuilt itself through ordinary facts instead of speculation. One afternoon, Emily received a telephone call she had been hoping for since the first day she opened the weatherproof box. A senior military historian informed her that the review panel had unanimously approved restoration of the humanitarian corridor's complete historical record. Daniel Mercer and every documented volunteer would officially become part of the permanent archive, ensuring future generations could study their work without the gaps that had hidden their contribution for so many years. Jack quietly lowered the telephone after Emily shared the news. He looked toward the front porch where the German shepherd rested beneath the warm Arizona sunlight, peacefully watching the distant desert without any sign of expectation. It almost seemed as though the faithful dog had known this moment would eventually arrive. Several days later, representatives from the Historical Preservation Office visited the hidden relief station together with military archivists, local tribal leaders, community volunteers, and county officials. No large ceremony had been planned. The gathering remained simple and respectful, exactly as Daniel's writings suggested he would have preferred. The memorial stone beneath the cottonwood tree was carefully cleaned without altering its original appearance. Newly verified historical information was placed inside a protective bronze display near the entrance to the valley so future visitors could understand why the forgotten road had once mattered so deeply. Emily quietly placed certified copies of Daniel's letters inside the display while the original documents were transferred to a climate-controlled national archive for permanent preservation. Jack carried the folded American flag to the memorial with both hands before gently placing it inside a handcrafted glass case positioned beside the engraved monument. The elderly Native American rancher stood silently nearby, removing his hat as sunlight filtered through the cottonwood leaves above. The German shepherd calmly walked to the base of the memorial stone and sat beneath Daniel Mercer's name exactly as valor had once waited beside the humanitarian road so many years before. No commands were spoken. None were necessary. In that peaceful silence, surrounded by ordinary people brought together through kindness instead of recognition, Jack realized the desert had never been protecting forgotten history from the world. It had simply been waiting until someone arrived who understood that the greatest discoveries are not measured by what is found beneath the earth, but by the forgotten goodness brought back into the light where it can quietly inspire generations yet to come. Weeks passed, and the forgotten humanitarian corridor quietly became part of the community once again. The restored memorial beneath the old cottonwood tree never attracted crowds or loud celebrations. Instead, visitors arrived one family at a time, often carrying nothing more than a small bouquet of desert wildflowers, a handwritten note, or a simple desire to understand a story that history had almost allowed to disappear. Every sunrise painted the sandstone cliffs with warm shades of amber, while cool desert air drifted gently through the peaceful valley, carrying the familiar scent of sagebrush, mesquite, and creosote after the occasional spring rain. Jack Carter found himself returning often, not because another mystery remained unsolved, but because the place had become strangely comforting. The German shepherd always accompanied him, quietly riding beside him in the pickup before walking the familiar trail without hesitation. Yet something had begun to change. The dog no longer hurried toward the abandoned highway each morning. Instead, he remained beside Jack until they reached the restored memorial together. He would pause respectfully beneath Daniel Mercer's engraved name, lower his head for a few silent moments, then calmly continue walking through the valley with relaxed confidence. The quiet urgency that had once guided every step had slowly disappeared, replaced by a peaceful certainty that felt impossible to ignore. Emily Brooks visited regularly as well, helping local historians organize copies of Daniel's letters, volunteer records, and photographs into a permanent educational collection housed inside the small historical museum in Red Mesa. School groups occasionally visited, listening quietly as guides explained how ordinary neighbors, military personnel, tribal families, ranchers, nurses, and volunteers had worked together when compassion mattered more than recognition. Jack never described himself as the man who solved the mystery. Whenever visitors thanked him, he simply smiled toward the faithful German shepherd resting nearby. He was the one who never forgot, Jack would quietly answer. One bright Saturday morning, a family arrived from Colorado carrying a carefully framed photograph. An elderly woman introduced herself as Daniel Mercer's niece. She explained that her family had searched unsuccessfully for years to understand what had truly happened during his final humanitarian assignment. Holding back quiet tears, she placed the photograph beside the memorial. It showed Daniel standing beside Valor beneath the same cottonwood tree decades earlier, both smiling beneath a cloudless desert sky. The resemblance between Valor and the German shepherd sitting peacefully beside Jack was remarkable, extending beyond appearance into the same calm expression that reflected unwavering loyalty. The elderly woman gently knelt before the faithful dog, placing one grateful hand upon his neck. "Our family finally knows where hope waited all these years," she whispered softly. The German shepherd quietly leaned into her hand before lifting his eyes toward the surrounding desert, as though acknowledging that the promise belonged to many families rather than only one. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the valley, children wandered respectfully along the restored trail reading the engraved names, while parents quietly shared stories about kindness, service, and helping strangers without expecting recognition. Jack stood beneath the cottonwood tree, watching the peaceful scene unfold. The abandoned road no longer represented mystery. The hidden valley no longer belonged to silence. Through one faithful German shepherd who refused to abandon an old path, an entire community had recovered more than forgotten history. They had rediscovered the quiet truth that even the smallest acts of compassion could travel across generations, patiently waiting for one loyal heart to lead them safely home. Autumn arrived quietly across the Arizona desert, bringing cooler mornings and longer shadows that stretched across the restored humanitarian corridor before the first sunlight reached the valley floor. The cottonwood tree had begun releasing bright golden leaves that drifted gently onto the memorial stone, creating a peaceful blanket that seemed more like a blessing than the passing of another season. Jack Carter continued visiting every week, sometimes alone and sometimes with Emily Brooks, but one detail had changed so naturally that neither of them noticed it at first. The German shepherd no longer stopped beside the abandoned highway at 6:15 each morning. Instead, he remained on the porch until Jack picked up his truck keys, then calmly climbed into the passenger seat as though he finally trusted someone else to remember the road. One crisp morning, Jack decided to drive toward the old mile marker where the journey had first begun. The cracked pavement looked exactly as it always had, stretching through the silent desert beneath an endless blue sky. Fine sand crossed the road in delicate waves while a gentle breeze carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and warm stone. Jack parked in the same place where he had waited on that unforgettable morning months earlier. He stepped from the truck expecting the German shepherd to walk toward the leaning mile marker as he always had before. Instead, the faithful dog quietly remained beside Jack. He looked once toward the old marker, then calmly turned away from it without hesitation. Together they walked only a few steps before the German shepherd gently brushed his shoulder against Jack's leg, something he had never done before. It was a simple gesture, almost unnoticed, yet it carried more meaning than any spoken farewell. Jack knelt beside him and rested one hand upon the thick black and tan fur around his neck. "You kept your promise," he whispered softly. The German shepherd closed his eyes for a brief moment, completely relaxed beneath the gentle touch. There was no urgency left inside him, no distant horizon demanding another search, no forgotten road waiting to be remembered. The mission that had quietly guided him through countless mornings had finally reached its peaceful conclusion. During the weeks that followed, neighbors throughout Red Mesa noticed another quiet change. The German shepherd became a familiar sight around town. He rested outside the small historical museum while children listened to stories about the restored humanitarian corridor. He greeted elderly veterans with calm respect outside the local coffee shop. He accompanied Jack during evening walks beneath glowing desert sunsets, never wandering toward the abandoned highway again. Emily smiled the first time she realized it. "He is no longer guarding the past," she said gently. "He is simply living in the present." Jack looked toward the faithful dog lying peacefully beneath the shade of a mesquite tree. "Maybe that is what healing looks like," he answered. One evening, as the sun slowly disappeared behind the western mesas, they returned to the memorial one final time before winter arrived. Golden leaves surrounded the engraved names while soft desert wind moved quietly through the branches above. The German shepherd approached Daniel Mercer's name, paused for only a heartbeat, then calmly turned away without looking back. He walked directly to Jack's side and sat there facing the open valley instead of the monument. Jack smiled quietly as the last rays of sunlight illuminated the peaceful landscape before them. Nothing had been forgotten. Nothing needed to be searched for anymore. The road had found its voice again. The forgotten hearts had found their place in history, and the faithful guardian who had carried one family's promise across generations had finally chosen, with complete peace, to come home. 1 year later, the desert greeted another spring with the same quiet beauty that had witnessed every step of the journey. Dawn slowly unfolded across the Arizona horizon, filling the sandstone cliffs with gentle shades of gold, while cool air carried the familiar scent of sagebrush, creosote, and blooming desert flowers after a rare evening rain. The forgotten humanitarian corridor had become a protected historical site, not because it was grand or famous, but because ordinary people had refused to let extraordinary kindness disappear beneath shifting sand. Visitors continued arriving throughout the seasons. Veterans stood quietly before the memorial with hands resting over their hearts. Families walked the restored trail reading the engraved names together. Schoolchildren listened with wide eyes as local guides explained how compassion had once traveled across the desert without asking where someone came from or what they believed. Every story ended the same way. The greatest heroes were often the ones history almost forgot. Jack Carter remained one of the volunteers who welcomed visitors whenever he could, though he never considered himself the center of the story. Whenever someone thanked him, he simply smiled toward the German shepherd resting peacefully nearby. The faithful dog had become part of the valley itself, greeting strangers with calm eyes and quiet dignity before lying beneath the old cottonwood tree whose branches now stretched even wider across the memorial. Children often sat beside him while listening to the history of the corridor. Elderly veterans gently scratched behind his ears before walking the trail in thoughtful silence. Somehow the German shepherd seemed to understand that his duty had changed. He no longer guided people toward hidden places beneath the desert. He quietly reminded them to carry the discovered truth back into their own lives. Emily Brooks eventually completed the official historical publication documenting every verified record recovered from the hidden caches. Daniel Mercer's letters, the volunteer registry, the restored maps, and the humanitarian mission became permanent educational resources studied by military historians and community organizations alike. Yet Emily always believed the most valuable lesson could never be archived inside a museum. It lived inside the quiet choices people made every day when they decided to help another person without expecting recognition. One peaceful evening, Jack and the German shepherd sat together on a wooden bench overlooking the valley as the setting sun covered the desert with warm amber light. A gentle breeze moved through the cottonwood leaves, producing the same soft whisper that had welcomed them on the first morning of their search. Jack looked toward the abandoned highway far beyond the horizon. From that distance it appeared almost invisible, blending naturally into the landscape as though it had always belonged there. He smiled quietly, realizing the road had never truly been abandoned. It had simply waited for someone willing to follow loyalty instead of assumption. The German shepherd rested his head against Jack's knee, completely relaxed beneath the fading light. Neither of them needed to search anymore. The promise had been honored. The forgotten names had been spoken again. The hidden path had returned to history, and countless acts of quiet kindness had finally found the place they deserved inside the hearts of future generations. As the first evening stars appeared above the peaceful desert, Jack understood one final truth that required no words at all. Time can cover roads with sand. It can fade ink upon old paper and weather stone beneath endless seasons. But genuine compassion, faithfully remembered and quietly passed from one heart to another, never truly disappears. Somewhere beyond the last rays of sunlight, carried gently upon the evening wind, the desert seemed to whisper its own quiet answer. The mission was complete, the promise was home, and faithful love had once again proven that the longest journeys are never measured by miles across the earth, but by the hope one loyal heart is willing to carry until someone else is finally ready to remember.